San Francisco Mayor London Breed announced a major crackdown on crime in the Bay Area, laid out big goals and promises, including new funding for policing for open-air drug dealing, car break-ins, and retail theft. Here's Mayor Breed during her announcement yesterday.
And it's time that the reign of criminals who are destroying our city, it is time for it to come to an end. And it comes to an end when we take the steps to be more aggressive with law enforcement, more aggressive with the changes in our policies, and less tolerant of all the bullshit that has destroyed our city. We are going to turn this around.
The announcement is a major reversal for Breed. The mayor had previously cut $120 million from the budgets of both San Francisco's police and sheriff departments as part of the Defund the Police movement. Team Rising is here to weigh in. Host of the Nomiki Show, Nomiki Konst, and culture editor at The Federalist, Emily Jashinsky, join us to discuss. Welcome to you both.
Morning.
Hey, guys.
So, Emily, was this was like a Batman moment. I kept thinking, if Kamala Harris wants to raise her approval ratings, why she should probably try to sound a little bit more like this. Does this signal that, some Democrats who get it and realize that you can't just do nothing about rampant break-ins and things like that?
Yeah, I think it does. I think her use of the word bullshit is actually really encouraging because that's ultimately what this is. And there are a lot of people who had perfectly great intentions who cooked up some of these ideas about progressive policing. Certain things and Michael Schellenberger has documented this very well. When you remove punishments for crime, the crime increases no matter how much you want to do this sort of galaxy brain math, that it's actually going to help. And so I think when you have somebody like London Breed coming out and calling it bullshit and recognizing that, it's a question also of does she recognize her own role in that? I'm curious to see where this actually goes going forward. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to actually reverse some of those policies. And that's going to be politically more difficult, but is less difficult in the climate where the numbers are increasingly bad and the situation is increasingly out of control.
And Nomiki, what's the way to square these high-profile smash and grabs that are going on all over the country, paired with a criminal justice reform movement that continues to try to roll back mass incarceration?
Well, I think this is a messaging problem. I mean, the reality is a politician saying bullshit is bullshit. I would love to see where she's getting her donations. I would love to see who's walked into her office to lobby her. I would like to see, what kind of meetings she's had since she said that she was cutting the budget. Because the truth is, we are spending more collectively, even with the budget cuts, on police than ever before in history. And the reality is violent crime offenses by population are nowhere near what they were in, say, 1989 and 1990, where it was 750 to 800 people there were violent offenses per 100,000 people. Now it's a peak in the last 15, 20 years, but it's at 350. It's very, very, very low. We've had record low crime over the last, 10 years, and we're making it look like we're in this unstable position. But, we're in a pandemic. People have been locked down. They're feeling we have income inequality. And the messaging problem here is with the progressive left in connecting those two things. When you have communities that have been ripped to shreds by the pandemic, which have people who've lost their jobs, who don't have stable employment right now, who aren't able to pay their rent, there's no rent control. People are going to do whatever they can to put food on the table. And I think that is what we have to address as society, not putting more money into the police departments, which, by the way, decide what a crime is and how to retaliate to that crime. So the stats aren't even accurate at this point.
Well, I hear you, and I've talked about this for a long time. You think crime is bad now. Crime was so much worse throughout the 80s, through the early 90s. But that's like a talking point I've been using for 10 plus years. It gets less true every year. We are ticking back up where the trajectory looks very concerning. And I'm about the last person that wants to increase the budgets of any government agency. But, protecting people from violence is the government's job. And it's one they are not doing as good a job of in recent years. So you're gonna have people rightly asking, why is the government losing control of this issue? And they're going to be less sympathetic or be less interested in some of the criminal justice reforms, that I support or would like to support, as long as things are headed in a positive direction. How do you answer that?
Well, I mean, I guess we have to ask ourselves first, well, if the police were doing their job, then why do we have this uptick? Because they have received more funding than ever before. I think there's this premise that the police are actually protecting communities, when we've seen time after time, video after video, that there are many police forces that are being investigated for literal organized white supremacy. They're targeting people who are unarmed, who are completely, normal citizens in society. I mean, we know what's happening in police departments, but the response shouldn't be, and this is a well-funded response by the police unions, who are really putting pressure on the mayors in these cities, and the conservative, the New York Post and all the tabloids, who are pushing out this narrative of a rise in crime, when the uptick is a tiny uptick, which is surprising given the circumstances that are on the ground right now in terms of income inequality. I'm looking at a chart right now from the FBI that is absolutely false.
No,
Literally.
It's not. It's absolutely not. There are cities around the country that are suffering huge increases in the murder rate, for instance. It does depend on what crime you're talking about. If you're talking about violent crime overall, absolutely. But there are particular cities that are suffering from huge increases in certain crimes, including murder, which is a very big deal to those communities. And so I would say I agree that the uptick, we are not where we were in the 1990s. We are not where we are at the peak. But in certain communities around the country, there has been a very large increase over a short period of time in certain violent crimes. Not all of them, in certain ones. And that is certainly a cause for concern. And some of the people who want, actually, if you poll the places where violent crime is worse, they want more policing. They want bigger budgets for policing. So I don't disagree that there are people acting in bad faith, taking those statistics out of proportion. But I also don't think it is particularly wise to dismiss these big spikes that have happened over a short period of time in particular types of crime.
So if I can just respond to that really quick, the violent crime, those murders, I'd like to drill down on those murders and see how many of them are domestic violence, because there's a surge in domestic violence, and there's very little evidence to prove that having more police in neighborhoods is going to protect people from domestic violence, because that is a result of people being at home, pandemic, the stress of living, we know, and of course, that is not something that the police deals with in a preventative way.
And so San Francisco's open, unregulated drug scene contributed to 3 times more deaths from illicit drugs than COVID last year, and has degraded the low-income, historically black Tenderloin neighborhood. Just last week, drug enforcement seized over 950 grams of drugs, including 600 grams of the deadly drug fentanyl, $3,400 in drug money, and arrested 17 dealers. Breed's speech puts pressure on progressive San Francisco supervisors and the district attorney to shut the scene down. When he ran for office in 2018, San Francisco District Attorney Chesa Boudin called, quote, open-air drug use and drug sales technically victimless crimes, unquote. When Boudin announced that he was not going to prosecute street-level drug dealers, he said it was because they are, quote, they themselves are victims of human trafficking. Miki, how much connection do you think there has to be between crime rates and criminal justice reform? Because I think that's the fundamental question. And with murders increasing, and I think you could say that the media is hyping smash and grabs, but they have led to a sense, a real sense of terror among a lot of people. People have died as a result of them, and if they start to be copied, as they do seem to be, that isn't something that people are going to put up with. Like the whole idea of our kind of shopping districts is a social contract whereby you're not going to go in with a bunch of people, smash the place up, and run out with stuff. Like that's the whole deal. And if that deal is broken, either you're going to see all kinds of walls and fences and armed private security guards go up, or the state's going to crack down and say, no, we're not tolerating this.
No, I think you're right. I mean, this is sort of a situation in which the media has been hyping it up, and there are copycat situations. But with that being said, it's not like the police don't operate anymore, and that the same circumstances, if you break into an Apple store and steal a bunch of iPads and you're caught, the police are going to arrest you and you're going to be prosecuted. It's not like those systems are not in place. I think the media is portraying it like we've become this lawless state where the police don't exist. The police, of course, are still completely funded. What I'm concerned about is that they're using this as an opportunity to really increase their budgets, hire more police, and not change their policies in any way. You know, there are root issues here. They're big systemic root issues that lead to a lot of these circumstances. And of course, you have a media, which I'm just going to keep repeating over and over, that is making this much worse because folks now feel that they're not going to be prosecuted for certain offenses. But this is something that you will be prosecuted for, and the police are there, whether or not an Apple store wants to hire a bunch of security guards or not, which they do, by the way, have. You know, again, we're not living in a lawless state. I live in New York City. I can't walk out the door without seeing at least 3 police officers on the block.
Emily, does that ring true to you? It sometimes feels to me in D.C. for the last that we've been living in a uniquely policed state in terms of like everyone was required to wear masks and all of that. But there's been more stabbings and shootings and murders in D.C. like every month than COVID deaths for the last several months. The state will marshal every level of coercion possible to confront the pandemic. But crime, rioters, people smashing windows, harassing people, yeah, maybe we'll do something about that later. We're certainly not going to stop it up front. Does that tension bother you as well? Do you think that bothers people?
Yeah, Robbie, you know this. Like, I live across, and you lived in this neighborhood for a long time, across from one of those open air drug scenes, and it's incredibly tragic. And you
I moved to get away from it. Yeah, and you see the evidence of it, every single day. But I think Nomiki said something really important, which is that there are a lot of systemic problems that the pandemic kind of laid bare and showed us, especially in urban areas where people who are commuters are gone. And we have in the middle of the day empty cities, and people sort of it took advantage of that to some extent, and to another extent, people needed money and they were in immense pain. And so I think what happened in a lot of cities is it emboldened progressive prosecutors, it emboldened progressive lawmakers and people in different areas of the local government to take actions that we're running an experiment with. And I think if you look in certain places, like San Francisco is a good example, the sort of open air drug scene, that experiment is not going well. And I think, and I'm not saying that means every single policy idea was wrong, but when you have had those results play out, I think now for about a year in some of these cities, if not longer, then you're going to get more and more London breeds, and hopefully they take responsibility for their role in it and for the real reckoning and saying, listen, we had good reasons to think this might work and it's not. But I think we're seeing a failed experiment, basically. Yeah. I have to leave it there. Nomiki, Emily, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
We'll be back with more Rising right after this. Stay tuned.